joined now by someone whose VFX career started off at the BBC, and it was whilst there he often found himself in front of the camera as well. So I'd like to introduce visual and special effects designer Paul McGuiness. How are you?
Hi, fine, thanks. Very good.
And
Strange lockdown times.
And keeping yourself busy during all this?
Yeah, still doing stuff, bits and pieces. We're hoping to get up and running on a couple of productions very soon. So yeah, I'm still reading scripts and doing designs and things for various jobs. A couple of Netflix jobs coming up. A big one, Sandman, Neil Gaiman's Sandman, which we're hoping it will start off in a couple of months' time. So yeah, lots of stuff on that. So we shall see.
Oh, brilliant. Well, hopefully things to look forward to then. But I imagine your encounter with Doctor Who was fairly early on in your VFX career, am I right in thinking?
Yeah, it was pretty much, as soon as I joined the BBC, I pretty much was straight into Doctor Who. It was already up and running when the series that was the Trial of the Doctor. And I came in, they were setting up to do the episode which I ended up being in, which was with Drathro, the L3 robot, and the actor that was supposed to be playing the part of Drathro had been measured up. The suit had been made to fit him perfectly, and when it came to rehearsals, he tried it on and was not happy about it, didn't like it, felt claustrophobic, didn't like it at all. So he started to back out doing it. He stayed on and did the voice, but the designer on the show, Mike Kelt, asked me to get into it because I was the only other person that would fit. He wouldn't fit himself because Mike is the same sort of height as me. He's about 6'4", 6'5", but he's got, as he said himself, childbearing hips and wouldn't fit. So he said to me, "How do you fancy it?" And I said, "Yeah, why not? This looks like fun." Little did I know that I was going to be bolted into this thing for days on end and come out covered in fiberglass rash and bruises and lumps and bumps all over. And it was because of the design of Drathro. You couldn't turn in a normal way. You couldn't turn your body because everything was hinged in a straight forward like this. So in order to walk, I had to do a kind of heel-toe walk and spin on my heel. And it was, after a few days of rehearsing, I managed to get moving quite well with it, but it was very difficult to start with. So there were usually about 6 people standing around me, ready to catch me in case I fell over, because if I fell over, there was nothing I could do. I couldn't save myself. But I think they were more worried about me fracturing the fiberglass than anything else. They didn't really worry about me. So yeah, that was my introduction to the BBC. I joined the BBC and was immediately thrown into Drathro and chucked into rehearsals with people like Joan Sims and people like that who I had grown up with and Carry On movies, and of course it was Doctor Who, something I'd grown up with, same age as me practically. So yeah, it was quite a shock to the system, really.
So having been thrown into the rehearsal room and expected to act, was there any ever point of going, well, I don't want to do this anymore, or was it just something you embraced?
Oh no, I loved it. It was fabulous. Immediately loved doing all of it because it was I'm reasonably extrovert, so it was just a kind of, yeah, I could do this. It doesn't, and my acting was not something that was, I didn't need to do a hell of a lot inside that robot, really. I had to march around, spin my head. I mean, it was all very, kinetic. And I had the director in my ear just telling me, "I want you to do this and do that," and so I just did the marching around. And Roger sat at the side on a mic, and it was the sound of his voice was boomed out over the speakers in the studio, so I knew what I was saying while the action was going on. And the cast were amazing. They were just so lovely, everybody. They just embraced me. I was just a part of the cast as far as they were concerned. So they were just lovely. And it was very, very easy to do, really. I mean, I was pampered. I was looked after, hand and foot. You know, you want a drink? Do you want this? Do you want that? Except you're not allowed to have a pint at lunchtime because you can't get unbolted to go to the loo once we get back. So yeah, because that would have been a real faff because it took about half an hour to get out, and then because the trousers went on, and then the top half was put together in sections. You had to put the front on, and then the arms had to go on, then the head, and then the back was bolted on. So the whole thing was bolted literally together. So once I was in, and that was it. So yeah.
So would you have had the costume during rehearsal, or was the first day in studio the first time actually sort of operating it?
No, we didn't have it in rehearsal. We didn't bother with that because there was no point. But we had it in the workshops, in the Vis Effects department's workshops. So I got the chance to do a lot of rehearsing with the movement, trying to get the movement to work. But there's like some of the pictures I sent you. You could wear the trousers without the rest of it, which was the best thing, because that was the difficult part, was walking, because it was literally, you could only go one way. You couldn't turn your legs or your feet or anything, so you had to be able to do this kind of weird heel toe thing to turn. So yeah, it was easy enough with that, because if I fell over I could put my hands out and save myself. Whereas if I was in the suit, there was no way, and my head only came up to the neck because the head was enormous, way higher up. So I had to jam my head up into that to turn it. So it was really was enclosed, and I looked through the three on the front was a kind of semi-transparent chromed plastic three, but again, that wasn't very easy to see through, so you could only kind of see, and I had to really lean forward to try and see what was going on, so you couldn't see people. And I punched Joan several times, and she was telling me that I was going to have to take her out to dinner if I thumped her anymore, you know, because I would raise my hand and she'd be in the way and she would get hit. So she's like, "You're going to have to take me out to dinner if we do that one more time." I'm really sorry. But yeah, so no, it was good fun. It was really good fun.
But particularly in terms of Doctor Who, that wasn't the last suit you found yourself in. You also were, I suppose, a special effects Cyberman. Was that a similar story?
Yeah, well, that came about because I don't know whether it was just cost reasons or what it was, but the BBC didn't have a stuntman on location with us when we were doing Silver Nemesis, and there were a lot of scenes where the Cybermen were hit with arrows and they exploded, and they didn't want to do this to the actors, which, I mean, it was perfectly safe, really, but they volunteered me, again, because I'm tall, to be the Cyberman that got blown up. So every time they got blown up, it was me that was running around. And we did reverse shooting, so we had an arrow that we pulled out. So the arrow was buried in the chest piece of the Cyberman, and we did a kind of reverse where I would lean back with the arrow and then stand up, and we'd pull it out and then run that in reverse, so the arrow would go in, and then we would do the bit where it exploded. So yeah, I was doing my cyber acting, yeah. And a lot of it was done as second unit, so we would go away and shoot those scenes while they were doing it, because there was so much going on. Silver Nemesis was quite a heavy shoot. And there were some times when we didn't get to do. I remember when we were filming in Docklands, we did a chase sequence with Ace, where she was being chased through all these derelict buildings, and we spent about a week drilling holes in the walls and wiring them up with detonators and dust and stuff. And we ran out of time and had to just de-rig it, or we weren't allowed to shoot it. It was so annoying because we had hundreds of these things all in the walls, and it was a great sequence, and we tested it and it looked great. And then on the day they just ran out of time, so we were pleading with them, please, let's just shoot it. No, we don't have the time. So yeah, things like that. It was quite a busy, hectic shoot, and we did move around quite a lot. Silver Nemesis we were in Arundel, we were in Docklands. Can't remember where else we were, but we seemed to move around quite a lot for Doctor Who, because a lot of times Doctor Who would just be in the studio. You wouldn't actually get it anywhere.
And that was a story that also had you working on models, which I believe was your sort of particular favourite niche.
Yeah, well, yeah, I'd always been a model maker, and so there was like 3 or 4 of us in the department who were kind of specialist model makers. And whenever any of these jobs came up, we would be like, "I'd like to do the models," So we would do that as well. But we were always expected to do all effects work. So we were all trained in pyrotechnics. We were all trained, welders, etc., etc., etc. So you could do all of those things. But there was a lot of guys in the department who weren't interested in that, so they were quite happy to let us do it. So yeah, we built all the kind of spaceships and guns, weapons, things like that. Any kind of unusual props. Especially if they had to do anything. If you had a gun that had to fire, then we would obviously have to do that, because it would be something we would be doing the pyros for as well. So yeah, with cyber ships, we did. Alan Marshall built the cyber for that episode. He built the cyber ship that landed, and then I blew it up. It was because he was really a bit, because I did a lot of pyros, so I did a lot of pyrotechnic work, and I did a lot of miniature pyro work. And I was the guy that made all the pyros, because it was done in a sequence. Because I think Ace threw a bomb in the front door of it, because they had built a section of the spaceship, and then very crudely for those days, they matted the model behind the doorway, and Ace did her thing. She threw the bomb in, and it was going to be a little bang, and then a bigger bang, and then lots. And I made all these little pyros up that did lots of little explosions. And Perry, who was the designer on it, was using a rotary pyro firing device. So you turn it and it fired, one after the other. So he was doing the rotary and he was timing it. And it was because we were shooting at high speed, it had to be done at a certain speed as well. So he was going, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, right, let's shoot it. Okay, turn over and action. And he just the whole lot just disappeared. And we all had a go at Perry about that one for a long time afterwards, because he just and just vanished. All my little tiny explosions just became one big bang. But that was, we shot that on the back lot at EastEnders. So EastEnders it was the Elstree, EastEnders set was just next to where we were blowing up the cyber ship, because it was the best place. It was a nice bit of outdoor land that the BBC owned, that we could do things like that. I could do bangs. So yeah.
But that must have been the joy of the department, particularly then, that 1 week it could be special effects heavy, it could be model heavy, but for something like the Happiness Patrol, that was more, I suppose, sculpting and gunge, wasn't it, really?
Yeah, there was a lot of gunge on that, I seem to remember. Pipes. It was the 80s and gunge was big. Everywhere you went, there was gunge, and the special effects department had to provide gunge. Noel's House Party and those sort of shows had gunge everywhere, kids shows, everything. And we perfected it. It was a food thickener called Keltrol, and food colour dyes and stuff. So it was all, you could eat it if you wanted to, but it was pretty unpleasant. And that was something that had happened after Drathro show, because on that, I remember the guns we used was actually Smash, which is dried potato, and that doesn't last. So there were huge kind of 2 meter square buckets of this around the studio, which started to rot after a day or two. And the studio stank because it was green. I remember the green guns. I remember there was a guy looking up a pipe, and I had to stand above him and dump this stuff in his head, and it was Cadbury Smash potato, mashed potato. But it stank the place down. And then we discovered this food thickener called Keltrol, which lasted forever. So that was what gunge became. That was our kind of development. But yeah, on Happiness Patrol, we did the Candyman. I did his endoskeleton, which was after I think he came down a pipe covered in gunge, and he had been melted, and that was what was left. But again, that was, in those days they didn't have much money. Doctor Who was one of those little niche programs that wasn't, given a lot of budget, and we had to make things on the hoof. So I think I sculpted his head, Candyman's head, but the rest of his body was drain pipe, I think, or something like that. And there were some bits and pieces, bits of model making stuff. But yeah, it was, a lot of these things were done very quickly for very little money. Yeah, but it was good fun. Yeah.
And something like the Candyman sort of exoskeleton, obviously the actual sort of suite costume was made by the
Yeah,
costume department.
yeah,
Do you
yeah.
look at the costume and sort of extrapolate from there, or do you just sort of let your imagination run with it?
Well, the costume. I mean, he was a licorice all sorts man, really. I mean, that was what they designed, and we were kind of. I didn't like it. I really didn't like it. I thought it should have been something else, but that was neither here nor there. It had been done. It was not my job, um, and I just wanted him to look more evil inside. So I wanted something that was more, Terminator-ish, but on a shoestring budget. So yeah, I did my version of a Terminator effectively. But yeah, that's the thing when it's the BBC in those days was all the departments had their budgets and everybody had uh, their own ideas, and there was the design department would design the overall look of the show, but everybody else had their own input. A lot of big shows nowadays, the designer designs most of what you're going to see, and like on big feature films, there's a lot of things. I worked on a couple of like Wonder Woman and Justice League and things like that, where it's very remote and your input is kind of quite small. So it was nice back then because you could let your imagination run free and do whatever you wanted, really. So yeah, it was good. It was good.
And would that have been the case for Kiv? Because Syl was a sort of established character, but I believe one of your early jobs was to actually sculpt Chris
Yeah.
Ryan's costume.
Yeah, he. I came again. I came into that episode when it was already up and running, and Nabil Shaban had been in previous episodes as Syl, and they had his costume. I think we remade some of it. We definitely made new face pieces for him. So he came in and we did some body casting on him, and then Chris Ryan came in and we did body cast on him. And yeah, and then it was a case of sculpting up his kind of slug suit, because he, like, unlike Nabil is just a disabled actor he's got quite short legs, and he fit completely into the costume, whereas Chris is obviously a normal sized person, so he had to sit on a hole or sit through a hole in a table with his little slugged body on top of that. So that was a kind of slightly different design, but yeah, there were two versions of him. Can't remember why, but he was green in one version and beige in another, and they were slightly different because he had kind of, I don't know whether he changed like a chrysalis or something and changed into his other version, but yeah, so there were foam rubber appliances that went around the face, and there was a basic hood that went on with a kind of spiky top. And then the body, it was 2-part polyurethane foam and latex skin, a very basic way of doing things. But again, in those days, that was what we did. And he basically slid into it from behind. He put his arms into it, and I thought I had some pictures of him somewhere walking around with the slug body sticking out, but I can't find them. What happened? Because that was quite comical. But yeah, so that was good fun. Again, it was one of those things where Stan Mitchell, who was the main sculptor in the special effects department, had done the previous designs with I can't remember Mike. I can't remember who the designer was on that one, but they had worked out how to do it and how it was going to look, and I basically went in and helped. I did some of the sculpting. I can't remember exactly which bits, but it was some of the kind of body and head pieces and things. So yeah, that was nice. Again, that was an very, very early in my career at the Beeb, and it was nice to just get straight into something that you were going to see on screen that much, as a main character. So it was good.
And would this have been particularly early days for things like foam latex and the casting and prosthetics that we perhaps take for granted these days?
Yeah, I mean, it was foam latex was the kind of, because everybody was saying, oh, it's too expensive, because we used to do a lot of the things literally in 2-part polyurethane foam, which is 2 liquids you mix together and they froth up. It's the sort of stuff that you get in sofas, it's that kind of foam. So it's quite soft, and you can cast it into any shape you like. But it's not particularly good for detail work. You know, it's fine for things like suits. You know, if you've got a big bodysuit, then you can use that. But it's quite heavy as well. So if you've got to do a lot of running around, it can be heavy and sweaty and, you know, quite nasty. So the foam latex, which is a slightly different process, was kind of what the industry were doing at that point. It was before we got into using silicons, because the silicons in those days were rubbish, basically. I mean, I only started using silicon in the kind of 2004 or 5 because it got good enough. Because I had started doing an awful lot of prosthetics when I designed Silent Witness, the first series of Silent Witness. And I was making all the corpses, but I was making them out of gelatine in those days because it was the only thing that looked like flesh. And then kind of the mid-noughties, the silicons started to get better. The platinum cure silicons came in, so I started making that silicon, which is what most people in prosthetics world use these days. That and Probondo, which is a kind of glue-like material, which you can use to do surface things, you know, like Drax's raised tattoos and Guardians of the Galaxy. That's Bondo, which is a very sticky, it's actually made from glue, but you know, you can do all kinds of things with it. It's great stuff. But these are all very new. Back then, it was foam rubber or nothing, you know, or gelatin. Gelatin was the thing that had kind of come up because people kind of say, gelatin, that's a weird thing. But when you make pieces out of gelatin and glue them to the flesh, the body heat makes it very soft, so it becomes very, very flesh-like, and it's translucent as well. Whereas latex isn't translucent; it's, you know, it's very much a beige foam. You know, it's not very fleshy at all, but it's soft and light. Whereas gelatin is very, very fleshy. So anyway, back to that. It was all foam rubber. Like all those things in the 80s and 90s were always foam rubber of some kind.
And that must have been a fantastic time to be in the BBC because you had Doctor Who, Red Dwarf, Star Cops. You know, there was all of these VFX heavy shows. That must have been, was that a particularly good training ground?
Yeah, the late 80s was great fun for me because it was all those shows, and I've always been a science fiction fan, so you know it was great to go straight from Doctor Who into working for a year on Star Cops, which was a more of a kind of down to earth, stupid, but everything had to be realistic. So we had a lot of input from NASA. There was a lot of talking to NASA about how things should look and how the ships should look. So everything was modular in design. I mean, bear in mind this was just before the International Space Station had been put up, and you know we were designing them effectively the way they would. So they were modular. We had all their what they suggested the airlocks would be like, etc., 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 and everything was done in a very realistic fashion. And it was it was one of those shows that it could have been better, but then budgets came in, you know, But on our side of it, all the model work was all done. It was all shot 35mm motion control, the way all the features were being done. So it was perfect, and we even stole John Dykstra's way of doing mats, which was to spray the model with a UV ink, transparent UV ink. So you'd paint the model, it would be finished, it would look lovely, and then you'd spray the entire thing with this translucent ink, which you couldn't see until you put a UV light on. And that was how you pulled your mat off the model when you were shooting it. Because again, this was in film days, so we were shooting it on film, so you had to key the model, you had to do a mat. And that was how we did it. So you'd shoot a high-res mat using ultraviolet light. All good fun. And again, it was motion control, which was the state of the art in those days. So it was all, we used to go to, like we did on Doctor Who, we'd go to Peerless Studios in Covent Garden and use their motion control rig. And we shot all the big space station where Doctor Who was on trial. That was the first big motion control shot that was done for Doctor Who or for any of those sort of shows at the Beeb. Mike Kelt talked them into spending most of the budget on that, and it worked well. It was a very nice shot. and they use it on every week in the opening title sequence. So, yeah.
So how has the industry developed from when you started out to now? Because it's worth saying that more recently you've worked on things like Wonder Woman, Justice League, Les Mis, Aladdin, you know, big Hollywood numbers. But how has it changed?
More money. There's. I mean, it's the same things. We do the same things. There's slightly different techniques now and again, but a lot of the times, special effects in particular, you know, the kind of effects that you see, the spectacular effects, haven't really changed. They're done using explosives, fire, etc., etc., etc. A lot of the differences in scale. You know, it's you know, if you're doing Justice League, we had enormous cannons firing water over, you know, Aquaman, which people looked at and said, "Oh, that's CG," but it wasn't. It was real. We had these things that fired. I think we had 20 of them that fired hundreds. I can't remember, hundreds of gallons of water at each one. You know, massive, because he's standing on a dock, and the waves come up over him, and they were real. You know, so things like that. It's just scale. You know, it's doing things for real. Again, though, there are a lot of things now that are done in the CG world, which I got into as well. I kind of pushed the department into setting up a visual effects department within the visual effects department. It's a kind of strange thing, because we were the visual effects department before there were visual effects, effectively. Visual effects, the BBC's visual effects department was called that because there was a sound effects department, and it was what was going to be in front of your eyes. It was the visual effect. And then when the computer world came around and started doing computer effects, they stole the name visual effects and said, "Oh, you're special effects." And I was like, yeah, okay. So, but in the mid 90s, I set up a visual effects department, or a visual effects unit inside the special effects department, doing computer animation, which we did the planets, the original planets, in 1998. But that was combined, because what we wanted to do was to combine everything, because because we were trained to do all the different things. So computers were, in those days, this is the 90s, they were okay. You know, they did some things okay, but they weren't as good as they are now at doing things. The programs were ropey. But they're good at doing some things. So we wanted to combine all of our talents, all of our knowledge, to do the best for each show. So we would do big model shots, miniatures, cloud tanks, all kinds of things, and then combine them in the computers to make something that worked, using miniatures in the way we'd always use miniatures, but then using the computers to do keying and dropping things in, and all that kind of stuff. And nowadays, that's what a lot of companies lack. There isn't that combining of things. I still try and do it. I had a company when I left the BBC called MacDine, and we did do a lot of things like that. And now a couple of the guys that worked with me there have now set up in the visual effects world. I stopped buying computers. I had hundreds of the bloody things. I stopped doing it and got out of it. But one of my friends, Alexis, who used to work for me and is now got his own company, we still combine things together. He's got a visual effects department or company that does high-end vis effects for TV and film, but we still collaborate on things where, because he worked for me for years doing special effects as well as visual effects when we were doing everything, because I had a studio where we would shoot things and combine them with miniatures and animation, all kinds of stuff, and we still try and do that. And it's something that I think is lacking a bit in the film world. There's some crossover, but not as much as I think there should be, because a lot of visual effects companies say, "Oh, we can do it all. You don't need you." You go, some things look okay, digital. Some things don't. There's a lot of things that still work better if they're physical, and also you can save a lot of money by having a physical thing on set and shoot it. There's times when, you can say, "Oh, we're going to have such and such a monster," and you'll say it's going to be digital, and they then have to plan every shot and every shot is very rigid, how that thing is going to appear, what it's going to do, etc., etc. You turn up in somebody in a suit on a set, and you can shoot the shit out of it, as we used to say. You can shoot every angle, and you can have things happen, serendipity, things happen that you don't expect, and you suddenly see something, the director goes, that looks great, we'll shoot that. Not the same with digital, because you have to then spend months going, that shot that he decided he was just going to drop in is now, 400 people rotoscoping everything else out of the shot and trying to make it work, and that's the beauty of physical stuff, because it's much more fluid, and you can make a much more sometimes action-packed, or whatever. You can do a lot more with it than you can digitally. There are some things that you can do digitally you can't do physically, obviously, but they're tools, and they have to be used for the right thing.
And so that combination of various elements, was that something you particularly relied on for the new Dark Crystal?
Yeah, that was going back to the early days. That felt very much like being back at the BBC, because we were using a lot of physical effects, which were old school stuff. When you're in a studio, the studio was all built at 5 feet up, so everybody was kind of nose high to the floor, because all the puppeteers had to be under the floor, obviously. And that was great, because it was so nice to be in an environment that had been completely created, and it was beautiful. The landscapes were absolutely fantastic. You were in this enormous environment, and you were making things happen because of puppet. Obviously, you couldn't do certain things, so we had to make things. Like, one of the things I did was one of the characters had to use some flints to make a fire, but of course there was 2 little hands like this that were holding things. So we did it with pyros. So there was a pyrotechnic inside the thing. I made little fiberglass rocks with pyrotechnics inside them, so that when you did this, you would get a spark coming out, and and then you had a fire that lit spontaneously. So those are the sort of effects that I started out my career doing, making things that just happened. A fire that lights up on its own, or sparks that come out of things. And we were also doing all the kind of environmental effects, so mist and smoke and all that sort of stuff. It was raining or whatever, but it was all in a studio in Langley, just down the road from Pinewood. And but that again, like I say, that was going back to those days, because here you are with people with their hands inside foam rubber things, running around. I mean, it progressed a little bit, because there was a lot of radio control involved, and the odd radio control in the highs, and etc., etc. But it was very much that kind of really old school special effects heavy show. It was great fun to work on. It really was.
Well, I think the idea of it's all come full circle. Some of those tricks from when you started out. I think that's a lovely note to end on. So I just like to say thank you very much for your time, Paul. It's been great to talk to you about some of your work.
You're welcome. It's been nice talking to you. Thanks very much.